Hey pilots, welcome to Jetworks build series. In this video I'll be showing you how I've built the F-22 Raptor using 3D printed parts. I've chose to go with a FMS 64mm EDF in this build. As you can see, I've got the 3D parts laid out there, including a bulkhead, thrust tube, intakes, the tail louvers as well, nose cone, and of course the thrust vectoring system. Working on the bottom of the wing plate, we've also chosen to 3D print the control horns, and we're just marking the alignment between the servo and where the horn's going to be on the ailerons. While we're attaching them to the wing, we'll just use epoxy to set them in position. Once you've cut the positioning for the control horns, flip over the wing and using low tack masking tape just cover the positioning. We're also going to cover the wing slots at this point as well. So just using each location and setting up a pin of where it's going to be, just so that you're not sitting with two separate pieces. Mix a small amount of epoxy, add it to the outer edges, leaving a gap where your movement is going to go between your wing plate and your ailerons. Just be sure not to get any glue in the middle that may inhibit the movement of your control surfaces, and allow the epoxy to set. Next step is to fit the carbon spars to your EDF housing. Here I've chosen to 3D print one using the measurements on the template. Just test fit it. The build guide asks that you use a 3mm ply. So here we're about to install it into the wing plate itself. As you can see, there's a tiny wee gap in the wing plate there that I noticed, so we're just removing it, pushing the wing plate back together, and then we're ready to install it. So now that I'm happy with it, flip it over. We've managed to locate two books of the same size, removing the inserts for the wing spars and the EDF airflow itself, with an additional piece of low tack tape on both sides of the carbon spar where it's due to go. Just put a wee bit, offer up a wee bit of tape, just so that if there's any additional spillages, it keeps your wing plate nice and clean, albeit this being on the underside of the wing. So I'm mixing up some epoxy here, however it was not enough, but as you'll see later on, in the next couple of minutes or so, you'll see that I have to add some, or mix up some additional. So offering it up to the wing plate where your slot is and just pushing it out to the edges to make sure there's a nice contact on the spar itself, and you get a nice flat clean finish on the top of your wing surface. Here we are adding some additional epoxy. Now that our books are underneath the wing plate, it's time to install the bulkhead. What I forgot to take into account was the length of the bulkhead. So where I taped up the underside of the wing, I actually had to peel back some of the low tack masking tape from underneath. So I will suggest that you measure the length of the bulkhead. I had marked up some lines there just to make sure that it was in the middle. So after a wee bit of messing about and playing with it, I managed to get it lined up, and then in the proper position. So adding some additional epoxy on the top. As I say, I didn't actually have enough mixed up in the beginning, and then using a scrap piece of foam, just spread it along so there's a good even bond between the wing plate and the carbon spars itself. Remove the tape, add some weights and allow the epoxy to set. Once it's set, flip it over and just remove the tape from both the carbon spars and your aileron hinges. Here there was a little additional epoxy that I chose to scrape away just before we went in further in the build. Gently removing the low tack masking tape just so we're not damaging any of the surfaces. Looks fantastic. So at the edge there's just a wee bit on the plans initially that was due to be cut. I'd left them in place at the time so that I knew that it was as flat and close to the wing plate as possible. Check that there's free movement and remove the additional holes that are possibly left in the wing spar. Next step is to fit the forward fuselage former. I've gently put a curve in this by dragging it across the table and just forming a small gap. Now the plans ask for a 11mm drop. I used a couple of sheets of Depron, which 2 6s are 12, so I may have been a millimetre out, but in terms of how I fly, I don't see that being much of an issue. So using some Yoo-hoo glue, offer it up to the wing so that both surfaces have some of the glue there, and I've gave it a couple of minutes to let it air dry. As you can see, with a slight curve, we're 12 mils from the top and we're touching the build surface. Next step is bulkhead 1 and bulkhead 2. Again, we'll be using Yoo-hoo pour. Offer them up just to make sure that you're happy with the wee test fit, nothing needs trimmed. Add a small amount of glue, whatever it is you choose to use. Put it in place, and here I am just making sure both surfaces have some glue on it. Allow it to air dry slightly. And as it's a contact adhesive that Craig kindly reminded me, once it's had that air time, you will offer it up to the surface and then you'll get a good bond straight away. Next step, bulkhead number 3 and bulkhead number 4, relatively quick and simple parts. Again, just like we did with bulkhead 1 and 2, small amount of glue on the contact surfaces, put it into place and let it air dry. With bulkhead 4, I just slotted that into place and left it there, a wee touch on each side. Next step is to put in the bulkhead jig. It asks that you pin or tape it into position. I've just slotted it in and it fitted pretty well. I didn't use any tape or anything, thinking that I may struggle to get it back out later on. So next step is to attach the forward fuselage belly and the lower sides. So here we are with the lower belly panel. It's already been trimmed using the angle cuts. Offer it up, happy with that. Add a small amount of your chosen glue. Just rubbing it about just to make sure there's a nice even flat contact glue in both surfaces. Allowing it to air dry slightly. Now the video has been sped up. You may think I'm only allowing it to air dry 1 or 2 seconds, but it's actually a wee bit more than that. Maybe 3 or 4. So this part, as there's a slight bend, you know, the 11 to 12 millimeters in the build guide, I've chosen just to use a small piece of tape to attach it at both sides, as there's a bend and I wasn't wanting anything pulling against each other and knocking it out of shape. In the last build, the build for the Buccaneer that I did, there was a comment, guys, from fellow pilot Pat Devini. Sorry Pat, I think, I hope that's how you pronounce your name, asking about the reverse cuts on mirrored pieces. What I would normally do, hopefully you can see this, the triangular pieces. So from this line we have to sand rearwards. There's a small dotted red line on there which kind of indicates where the 6mm would be, and then this black line here is where you actually want to sand it to. I think it's quite hard to show here, but once we've sanded it down, hopefully it'll make some sense. There is a cut also here on the top, I'm hoping, as the dotted lines is reverse cuts, which means you're cutting underside, cutting blind to me, but it's marked on the plans, angle cut on the reverse side. Triangular pieces mirrored, hopefully, and we can see. We'll use this camera as well just in case. Not sure, but we can check it out. So we're going to cut this part here, we're going to cut at that angle, sand from here to there, feather it down this way, and then the reverse cuts at an angle again. So we're cutting this way from the top down to the mat, and then from here we're cutting from the edge of the foam, which is the top side, and we'll be cutting through at this angle underneath, and then the same on this side, whereas this part will just be cut from the top. So let's give it a go, and hopefully I've got this right, Craig. Possibly not. So what I usually do with the top piece, so well, the initial piece there, so that's mirrored pair, there we go, and this is where it gets confusing for me. So what we'll do, we'll turn it that way and hopefully you can see it. There's the end of the foam, and I'll just hold it as close to the shape that it's supposed to be, and then with a nice sharp blade at the angle, and try and judge it so you can see through to the bottom of the cutting mat. Nice sharp blade, and follow the line. Let's try that through. I think that looks okay. It's just a thin sliver. So for the opposite side, the mirrored piece, what I'll do is I'll turn it over, and I'm left, hopefully, yep, with the piece that I've cut out. So again, just nice and gently, just judging the angle. Oh, slide through it there. Just make sure you've got a nice sharp blade. Looks okay. So there's the first part of the mirrored piece. So turn it around back to where we are, and then an angled cut for the reverse side. Now what we're looking at here, probably about 6mm. So that would be to, if we line it up with the cutting mat to there, so starting at the edge, you want the tip of your knife to meet that line. It's looking down, let's get it across a bit. It looks a bit straight. So for me, I'll take it in there and try and make sure the edge of your blade is right at the top and the tip of your blade is at the bottom. So in there, it looks like a 45-degree angle. Nice and gently, hopefully the tip will come out on the line. Let's see. Oh, is it? Yeah, looks okay. So again, on the opposite side, or the next angle cut, let's try and line that up again. There's probably an easier way to do it, but this is how I do it, and I hope this helps. So again, tip your blade on the line, because that's where we've hooked it up. Tip of the blade on the line, and making sure the fat part of the blade is at the top of your foam. And nice and gently. Try and keep the blade at the same angle. Hopefully again it will come out on the line. Let's move this away. Blade still on the line, that looks a nice clean cut. So if I mark this quite heavy, hopefully we'll see it on the other side. And again on the reverse cut, quite heavy with the pen. Yeah, I can see it. There's a faint line there and a line there, so if we mark it up again. If there is an easier way, pilots, you know, I'm not the only one that scratch builds in the community, so if there's an easier way of doing this, please feel free to, you know, drop a comment in or something, and you know, let's share the knowledge and help build bigger, better, stronger together. So here we are again, so lining it up, we're looking for a mirror cut underneath, so like we did before, get the tip on the line, the cutting line. Oh, keep a hold of it, Buzz, and then use the fat end of the blade at the top of the foam. So looking at an angle, and guys, if this goes wrong for you, this is the joys of filler. So turn it round, get it on a cut line with the mat just for help, and let's try that again. Tip of the blade on the cutting line, nice and gently. Sharp blade, make sure you've got a sharp blade, guys. Hopefully this will come out on the cutting line. On the top we've cut that way, and then for the angled cut on the reverse side, in that way and in there. What we'll do now, I think, is mark it up the sanding line. Slide that just to the side. Using this part as your base, slide it down. And I'm going to feather down to there. That's that piece. Well, Pat, I hope this makes sense. I'm not sure if it makes sense to me, but let's say hopefully if you guys can share some tips, best practices, then we can get together on this. So there we go. That's how we do reverse cuts on a mirrored part. Let's keep that together. So here we are finishing off the side panels. Just marking up from the plans where they're due to be sanded and feathered out. So on the fuselage, just sizing up both pieces that have been shaped with the mirror cuts and sanded down just at the edge where both of them meet, just so you get a smooth curve and transition moving into the EDF unit itself. So just using a pen, and once the sides are in position, just slightly mark up on the wing plate where I'm going to put any glue there. As you can see, I was just with a test fit, I could see that there was a slight bend in it to go along with the nose, so offered it up to the side of the table and just pulled a small curve in the side panel, attaching some glue to the locations where we're about to put on the side panels. And here I am doing up both sides, but as you can see, I've actually put a small amount of glue on the centre section that is used as just a wee rib, a wee supporting spar. So we'll take that off, give it a clean up to make sure that we're not actually sticking it to the side panels. So once they're up, I'm just smudging it about, making sure there's a nice even application of glue along the contact surfaces. And again, just pulling it away and allowing it to air dry, so that as soon as we offer up, you get a good bond. It's just the slightest of adjustments. So onto the rear of the transition and the forward fuselage on the belly part. So here on the angle cuts, again just on the contact surfaces, just applying a small amount of glue, offing it up into place, and again just sort of test fitting it while the glue's on there and just smudging it about. Quite happy with the fit, and take it off, just allow it to air dry slightly, put it back up, and be careful about how you put it into position, because now you've got that bond straight away. In some of my other builds, as you've probably seen, I'm quite eager to get things built. I just put it on and tape it up, or you can use modelling pins. So here, just before we put on the belly panel, just trimming away any slight angles on it, just that I may have overcompensated when we were doing the slices and bevels and cuts. Trimming it away so that when we put the belly panel on, it attaches nice and flat and flush. So you've got a good contact surface and a nice strong bond all the way along. Just make sure it's a nice sharp blade, and be careful. A wee bit of glue on the end there. The joys of Depron. So on the front, you can see there's a slight fade. There's marks on the wing, on the plans itself, that you just sand it down, feather it off to the front. So once we've done that, just apply a small amount of glue, offer up the fuselage belly forward, again smudge it about so there's a nice even coating, allow it to dry slightly to allow the glue to become nice and tacky, and then offer it up. So here we have the forward fuselage belly lower and the servo reinforcements, and also the EDF mount itself. So as the build guide goes, I will stress that please do, have a good thorough read of the build and don't just follow along these build videos if you choose to do so, because this is how I build. I jump back and forward and do what's best for me. So here we had put on the nose panel, and we're moving to the reinforcement parts at the end, the servo reinforcements. You can see in one of them I've got an additional slot in it, and that's for the thrust vectoring system, an additional place for the servo itself. So once you've got a small amount of glue, offer it up. The build guide itself actually says that this step should have been before we put in the servo reinforcements. So there's the EDF foam housing at the front. So just offer it up to the wing, make sure we test fit. Just put in a small amount of glue on the lips and just in between along the surface where the wing plate itself will meet up. Next part is the exhaust bulkhead. Like I was saying, the plans show that the bulkhead should have been on before the servo emplacement. So we're just removing the bulkhead former that was used earlier on, attaching the forward bulkhead supports. Next step is to install the sides on the fuselage. However, at this point, before I went any further, I chose to install the servos and check all the linkages and controls were working. So here we've got an elevon set up, and then flicking the switch to get it onto a dual setup for the thrust vectoring system. So there's the ailerons and the elevator. Flick the switch, and then we have all surfaces moving in the same direction. Now moving back to attaching the fuselage sides to the assembly. So on the plans, I'm sure it's 35mm it's asking you to mark where you put in the formers. And just before I went any further, I was tidying up the servo wires, putting them into position and just getting them out of the way so that I'm not gluing the wires into the side panels itself. Happy that that's out of the way. What I've chosen to do is add a bit of hot glue onto the end pieces. You also see there that I've cut away just a bit of relief at the tops of the side panels where it meets the wing plate, just so that the servos move freely. Like I was saying, on that side I used a wee touch of hot glue just so it's instant fix around the servos, and the same on the opposite side. Some glue on the bulkheads and along the wing plate and exhaust former itself. Once I'm happy that that's stuck and in place, moving on to attaching the rest of it. Like I have done with other pieces, just a pen, mark along the wing plate where I'm due to add some glue. Allow it a little bit of airtime, smudge it about, make sure that it's in place. Realign the former itself and then hold it until it sets. Only took a couple of minutes. Next step is to attach the 3D print assembly. Unfortunately I didn't have the camera rolling at the time, but what I did was I had the fuselage up on its nose so that it was as horizontal as possible. You see I've got some push rods through it to make sure it was all aligned, and I have a carbon spar through the back as well. So there's 3 points and a battery weighing it down. I've got some epoxy, 20-minute epoxy, on the end of the 3D print assembly, and just allow it to set. So next step is to install the EDF intakes, thrust tubes and formers. So here's the EDF exhaust tube that I've printed. Quick test fit with the EDF unit, and quite happy with it. So I was just lining it up to see where the ESC wires were due to go, and just cutting out as small a hole as possible to make sure that, you know, it's as tight a fit as can be, and just one wire at a time, get it through. So there's 2 of them in, and then the third one, yeah, nice tight fit, which makes it a bit tricky when you're trying to install it from the inside. So what we did was put the thrust tube on first, slide it right to the back, and then get the EDF unit and put this in place. Now the design is for 70mm, whereas the 64mm is a bit shorter in length compared to the 70mm. So you can see that there's a bit of a gap. Once it goes through and slots into place, there is a bit of a gap at the front, but we sort that out with a couple of pieces of Depron. Just cut a couple of wee flanges to hold it in place and make sure there's no leakage. As nice and tight and airflow as possible. So once that's in, it's not secured in, it's just holding through and into the bulkhead. Pull through the wires and get the EDF unit in place. Just checking fit, quite happy with fit, how it is. Having a look at the placement of the wires. Now you can see there that I am going to need a small extension to the ESC wires itself. So now I'm happy with that. Just using a bit of hot glue, holding it into place, make sure it's nice and flush in the EDF housing itself, in the bulkhead, and then I just smear a wee bit of the hot glue just to break the surface tension on the glue itself, and I find that sometimes you get a better bond. Flip it over and we'll do the same on the other side just to secure it into the bulkhead itself. Just hold down the position. Once we're happy that it's nice and secure, just allow the hot glue to dry. So due to the gap here, I'm using one of the existing bulkheads that are 3D printed, just to ensure that I've got the right size of the EDF unit itself. Using a couple of scrap pieces of Depron, just pretty much cutting an O-ring of the same size, and using a bit of glue just to attach them both together so that we've got a nice fit. Cut it in half, and I'll apply some glue, and then I'll offer it up, and this will close any of the air gap itself. Flip it over onto the other side, move the wires out of the way. We test fit, and I actually did a wee bit of trimming just so it was nice and tight. Apply some glue to the unit and then to the surface that meets up with the bulkhead. And this should seal in any gaps itself. So checking the fit with the EDF intake. Just using a pen and marking up where the glue is due to go. Just trying to keep it as nice and clean as possible so that there's no glue going into the unit itself. Looks pretty good. Yeah, there is a bit of a gap, and you know, I could probably sand it so it's nice and smoother, but I think, you know, overall I'm pretty happy with that. So with a blade, nice sharp blade. Just I was trimming just a wee bit more just so that it wasn't as rough. A little glue, a couple of minutes just to air dry, and then slot it into position. Now at this point it is very tacky, so you have to, you know, get it into the position that you're looking for and make sure it's there. Just moving the wires out the way. I've already pre-numbered them, so when it comes to fitting them to the receiver, I know where they are because I'm going to have to put extension cables onto them as well. Now the 3mm Depron formers there, that's just to help drag the airflow from the intakes straight down to the EDF unit itself. Just applying a small amount of glue, offer it up in place, and making sure the glue is tacky by pulling it away from the surface, putting it back in. Just allow the glue to dry. So here I are with the numbers and attaching them to the receiver, and again we're just going to check everything before I seal up the unit by adding any further side panels or belly panels, just so that we know we have full contact to everything and it's all working. What I tend to do also is in the receiver ends of the servo extensions, I will put a bit of hot glue just to make sure that none of them break free. So here we're just attaching the thrust tube to the unit. We're fed through the wires of the motor. Just allow a bit of air time for it to dry, because we want that nice contact. As soon as it touches, we're stuck into position. And it's all looking pretty good. So a nice wee squeeze, make sure it's nice and tight, and happy with the fit. So the next step in the build guide is the belly panel, and we chose to use the thrust vectoring panel itself. On the thrust vectoring panel there is some cutouts at the front where the intakes are, and obviously at the back where the thrust vectoring louvers are due to go as well. So on the contact surfaces, just apply a small amount of glue, offer up the belly panel, squeezing it into position. I'm just, at this point, I'm just using a wee bit of tape because there's a slight curve in it. Add some glue to the belly itself on the front fuselage, and I'm just using the intakes just as a shape, just to make sure that we're gluing the belly on in the right position. It's not too short or too large. Either way, we'll be adding filler or sanding some away. Yeah, I'm happy with that, with the sizing. So at this point, I'm adding trailing and leading edges, a wee bit of reinforcement. So here we're putting on the tips, and because where I fly, there is no landing gear on this model. And I'm sure some of you will have seen the terrain that I fly through, be it the trees or the long grass. Unfortunately, sometimes my landing's not the best. So here we've got some leading edge balsa strips, and I'm reinforcing the tips first. Once the wing tips are done, I'm just using some glue. We'll then put on the leading edge. That way the leading edge itself on the wing plate is covering up the wing tips itself, and I'll sand that off so it's nice and round. Wee bit of tape just to press it against the wing to make sure it's nice and strong. So here on the horizontal stabilizers, there is markings on the plan that are to be feathered down to probably about 2 millimeters. Any lower than that, then it's not very strong. The Depron becomes quite weak. So what I usually do is get a nice sharp blade, cut away at an angle so that I've got the mirrored surfaces before I sand it, and make sure that I'm doing the right thing. However, here choosing to use some trailing edge. So on using the template on the wing itself, the tail, sorry, just marking off where it is you would feather it up to. Cut that away, flip the wing, the tail piece over, and then marking there just as the point where the two angles meet. Trim away as well. The trailing edge that I have, I think it's about 8 to 9 millimeter trailing edge in length, and 5 3/4 millimeter height. So again, using the template, offer it up to the balsa, mark where it's due to be cut, and with a nice sharp blade, just make sure you're applying a bit of pressure and just the very tip of the blade. Just keep cutting it through. It does take a wee bit of time, a wee bit of trimming as well. Once you've got the first part cut, offer it up to the wing itself or your control surface to make sure you're happy with it, and again using the template, mark it up for the next cut. So here what I'd actually done was I had turned the trailing edge for whatever reason the opposite direction, so that when I cut it, it was the wrong shape. So again, back to the template and cut some more. Once you've got the angle done, I think the angles are the most challenging part, just to get an absolute flush finish. I never really get it as perfect, but again, there's the joys of filler. One of the other reasons I'm doing this, because it's quite a low belly at the back and thrust vector, and when a flare plane's in for a landing, sometimes the tail tends to get ripped off the elevators. Especially, I know it happened on my SU-57 a few times and had to replace a few elevators. So offering up some glue, and just gluing it into position. You can see that the trailing edge itself is feathered away. Yes, it will add a slight amount of weight, but I'm pretty sure with the FMS 64 there'll be enough push in this model to take into account any balsa that's there. So moving on to the trailing edge, the leading edge here. Again, just using the leading edge itself to cut away the amount of foam that required, because we're replacing it with balsa. Just use the angles of the plate itself, mark it up, glue it, and put them into position. So here we are fitting the tail, the elevators itself, the control rods and things. Here I've already extended the ESC and put it into place as per the instructions. I did think about putting it on the belly panel, but I thought, with speaking to Craig, as people may very well follow the guide, certainly wasn't want to confuse anyone, and I think it's actually okay in the position that it's in. So there's wee servo cables along the sides. I was just reinforcing them and sticking them down with some hot glue so that they're no flapping about in flight. Attaching the receiver, I actually removed the receiver a bit further back. It should be in between the next two bulkheads, but I removed it back a bit. So here on the tail, the 3D printed parts, I'm using 6mm Depron rods. Now these fitted the tail itself. The plan will ask for aluminium tubes if you're building the Depron model itself. When you use aluminium tubes, the 6mm carbon rod goes through it pretty well. However, the 3D printed parts are fantastic. 6mm fits in it great. Very little friction at all. Nice and easy moving. So onto the elevators itself, like I usually do, using some low tack masking tape, mark it up, and then apply some epoxy, just making sure you're not too close to the end pieces itself. Now the rods itself, you'll see I've pushed it through and sort of measured it up just by feel of where the control arms will go as well, and these control arms are 3D printed. Attach it nice and flat, make sure it's level on the build surface. Once your epoxy's cured, just remove your low-tack masking tape. There is a couple of small holes where there wasn't enough epoxy, but we'll take care of that later with some filler. So when we're installing them onto the end piece, I have some drilled out prop adapters there, just pushing it on the inside. Happy that it fits pretty well, just on and no more. And I'm just using a bit of CA glue and some kicker just to attach them to make sure that, you know, they're set and held in place. With the CA it's pretty much instant, but the kicker kind of helps make sure none of the glue travels out any further and may inhibit any movement. Again, same on the other side, push the prop adapter in. We spot a CA, splash a kicker, and there's our control surfaces in place. Just check to see they're nice and freely moved. So here I am making up some control rods, some push rods. So we've got a wee Z bend at the end, and then we're doing the opposite Z bend on the far side so that the control rod actually stays on the inside of the hull, and keeps us as far away from the control surface as possible. Push that through and then slide it into the linkage stoppers. Level up and just make sure it's nice and tight. We will adjust these later on prior to flying, and obviously after testing the flights itself. Again, do the same on the opposite side. And then measuring up where the linkage is supposed to go, the linkage stopper, and then obviously measuring at the end of the elevator so that the bend is on larger than the control surface itself, so it doesn't get in the way. Again, push that back, just freeing up the linkage stopper there. I think I had a wee bit excess glue on the threads, slacken off. It's always Loctite. This was the blue Loctite, which is movable. If you use the red stuff, yeah, it's pretty much bond is there. So once we're happy that they're in place, quick check, make sure everything's working. Now on to the EDF thrust vectoring system itself. You can see we have the louvers, 3D printed the louvers, and I've attached a control horn that I printed. The pins on each end, I did some exact same, mirrored the pins. Great size. Also printed some washers. Initially I'd printed 2mm washers, but there was a wee bit tight, so I printed 1mm washers, which seemed to work pretty fine. Using 3mm carbon rod here for the hinge pins. This was a wee bit fiddly, sliding it through and just having the washer sitting on it and no more, before we offer up the 3D louvers to it itself. Thrust vectoring louvers, sorry. First side's always the easiest. And then just getting the second pin in, just enough to accept one of the washers, albeit only 1mm. But again, this was quite tricky, getting my fat fingers in where it should go without dropping the washer, and then trying to line it up against where I think the hole is for putting the pin through onto the thrust vector leaf itself. Like I say, it's a bit fiddly. But it looks fantastic all the same. There we go, that's it slid into position. Once you're happy that that's done, flip it over. We're going to do the same on the underside as well. However, before we go any further, we're going to make sure that our control rod is fed into the linkage stopper. So now that it's into the linkage stopper, obviously we've not tightened it up as yet, but we're just attaching our washer and 3mm pins. And again, we're going to offer it up to the louver. So a wee twist, get that into place. And then I think I actually did better this time around. Now the pins are slightly tight. I'm happy that the pins are tight on the house in itself, but moves very freely on the louvers. Slide that in. Yeah, can't wait. It's going to be great. Next step is the bulkheads. I think there's a slight misprint here that I'm sure Craig spoke about. So this part, just here at the back, I made some just small relief cuts to allow the servo wires to go through. Very simple. You can see there's a slight bend in it. I've also marked on the panels where our front formers are going to attach up to it, so which is in a couple of the next steps away. So on the opposite side again, add now your relief cut for the servo wires, mark the wing, and then on that bulkhead that just glued there, we're speaking to Craig, once we fit the canopy, 3D printed canopy later, there's a slight overhang from the canopy, so whether that means the plans need to be adjusted to have a bigger bulkhead there, which would force the canopy sides out slightly more, or whether we just use a bend in the surface itself. So Craig will update the plans. Here 3D printed Nosecone, very simple. Using the Nosecone aligner tool, add some glue to it and then put that up and offer it to the fuselage so the glue becomes nice and sticky. The forward fuselage piece and the rear battery hatch magnet panel, again just trimming them, making sure they fit in place. Offer up some glue and allow it to become tacky, and then put them into position. So the next step is the upper fuselage sides. See, here we have them laid out. On the plans itself, there's a marking of where you will actually put a slight bend in it. What I'm doing here is just using a piece of balsa and just getting a slight imprint on the inside, which just puts an indentation, or using a pen and gently scoring through it. It just gives a little relief where you can bend the foam a little easier. This is just how I do it, as you'll see in the guide. It shows you how to use it on a table with books to support it. Good old hand sanitizer, removing that green Depron side. So as you can see, there's slight bends in it. Test fit, offering it up to the fuselage. Looks pretty good. So then I'm using the Yoo-hoo paw, just applying some glue to the control, the contact surfaces. Slide it about, make sure it's been in position and there's glue meeting both contact surfaces. Pull it off and allow it to air dry. Once you give it that air time to dry, you get an instant bond as soon as you put it back up and offer them together. So next step is onto the top infill pieces. and the reinforcement panel on the top belly. So these are the parts that we angle cut earlier. On the contact surfaces, apply some Yoo-hoo or glue, whatever your choice of glue is. Offer up, give it a wee smudge about so there's nice application, or kind of even application along the surfaces. And again, offer up the other side, squidge it about a bit, and just allow some air drying time to it. Once you give it a couple of minutes to become tacky, offer it up to the surface, put it into place, and then it's stuck. Just press it into position. The top panel support piece, you'll see I've already cut the grooves into it. It was looking a bit thin, and I thought I might have applied a 3mm piece of Depron, but we just rolled with it, see how it goes, and I think it'll be fine. So we just apply a small amount of Yoo-hoo on the support piece at the tail, allow the glue to become tacky, and then just offer it back up into position and just glue it down, set it in place. So here we are, supposed to sand next. However, I got kind of excited once this was glued in place. As you can see, we're just touching the contact surfaces, make sure there's a good application of glue there. We are due to sand it, but I just got excited and carried on, and just carried through the build without actually sanding it, and putting the tail on before that, which makes sanding that wee bit more challenging. So once we've gave the top panel some air time, or allowed the glue to have some air time, become more tacky, offer it up, put it down into place, and it's stuck. And then the forward panel, again, just glue, put a small amount of glue in place, a wee bit of trimming to make sure it fits, and then glue that down. The next step is the 3D printed intakes, and using a scrap piece of foam just to fill the slot. So you can see we're offering it up there, and in between the two of them, that's where the wee additional scrap piece of foam will go in as a slot. Happy with the fit, and then again just using some Yoo-hoo or whatever your choice of glue is. Offer it into position and just give it a good smudge about so that all the contact surfaces have been met with glue. I think the 3D parts are fantastic. But like we say in the build videos, you know, all these models can be made with using the Depron. There's no need for a 3D printer, but it certainly helps crack through the builds, and it gives it that scale finish. I then just take the opportunity as well just to apologise for the light tones in the video. For some reason the camera decided the automatic exposure would darken things up against the white Depron and the green background. So like I was saying, the next step is to sand and then fit the stabilizers, the vertical stabilizers. Of course, I've not sanded it at this stage. I'm just test fitting the vertical stabilizers. Looks fine, and then I come to glue it later on. So that's the build. So let's have a wee recap on the canopy support sides, guys. I've spoke to Craig about this. I think the build itself looks fantastic, but when you add the 3D part, you can see there's a slight overhang on the edges of the canopy. Craig's going to address that. He's going to update the plans itself. So guys, pilots, thanks for watching and following the video this far. I hope it's helped you in some way, if not any way at all. Please do leave comments in the section, like, subscribe, and get this channel to where it should be, and let the YouTube algorithms do what they do. But like I say, thanks again. I'm looking forward to seeing your F-22s out there. Craig also has a fantastic finishing guide online and a pusher version of the Raptor itself. So there's only one thing left for me to do, and that's give it a small thrust test.